In pro wrestling, there are a ton of different in-ring styles, but over the years, there's been an increase in wrestlers opting for a hard-hitting style of offense. This is known as being stiff in the ring, or can sometimes be referred to as strong style. This style of wrestling is rather physical, and while some say the style is dangerous, it's kinda safe. It's about hitting as hard as possible without causing any long-term damage on the opponent in question. This style is popular in Japan, but it's seen an increase in WWE, especially since WWE have allowed their talents to become more experimental in their in-ring work. Join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 of the stiffest wrestlers in WWE. Oh, the double entendres. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 10. Drew McIntyre. A former WWE champion, Drew McIntyre hasn't always been incredibly stiff in the ring. During his initial run in the company, Drew was rather reserved in his offense, but all this changed after a successful run in Impact Wrestling as well as the independent scene. When Drew returned to the company in 2017, his in-ring style had completely altered. Drew was now insanely physical in the ring, and this allowed WWE to see him as a legitimate tough guy, as well as someone they could put in a main event position. Drew has admitted in a number of interviews that he prefers this in-ring style, and he has a specific preference to wrestle those WWE superstars who match this intensity. This likely explains why Drew has had fantastic matches with the likes of Sheamus and Bobby Lashley, both which have similar in-ring styles to the Scottish psychopath. Number 9. Gunther. A very few superstars on the WWE roster can match the sheer intensity of Gunther, aka Walter. Gunther is like nothing that WWE has seen before, and he made his name on being stiff in the ring and delivering some of the most brutal looking offense ever seen in the squared circle. It's said that Gunther has the most lethal chops in wrestling, and anyone who has wrestled a former NXT UK champion will be able to support this claim. Now, although Gunther prides himself on hitting hard, it's worth noting that Gunther's in-ring style is safe, and it makes for compelling viewing as a WWE fan. Since joining WWE, Gunther has managed to have classic matches with the likes of Ilya Dragunov, Pete Dunne, and Tyler Bate. All of these have attempted to match the ferocity of Gunther's offense, which has naturally resulted in some of the stiffest matches in NXT history. Number 8. Goldberg. Goldberg's reputation for being overly stiff in the ring began in WCW, and this unfortunately continued to his two respective runs in WWE. Goldberg, unlike anyone on this list, doesn't quite pride themselves on being stiff in the ring. That's because most of Goldberg's stiff offense comes from dangerous and reckless accidents in the ring. In WCW, Goldberg notably hit Bret Hart with a stiff kick to the head, and this would end a promising career for the wrestling legend. In WWE, there are a number of examples of Goldberg being stiff that could have resulted in serious injury. The most well-known example of this is Goldberg's infamous match with The Undertaker. Goldberg's stiffness came out of a concussion, but nevertheless, this was an example of where a WWE superstar being stiff in the ring crosses a line and becomes incredibly dangerous. Number 7. Bobby Lashley. Similar to Drew McIntyre, Bobby Lashley returned to WWE back in 2018 with a brand new wrestling style. Lashley was now a successful MMA fighter, and his in-ring style incorporated a lot of MMA style moves. Lashley is now extremely physical in the ring, but he is without a doubt one of the safest and reliable superstars on the current roster, having never injured anyone. This revamped in-ring style made fans draw comparisons between Lashley and Brock Lesnar, and the two would eventually square off in a dream match at the 2022 Royal Rumble, which Lashley won. The more physical in-ring style for Lashley has been rather successful, and has allowed him to wrestle in a way that he feels comfortable with. Since returning to the company in 2018, Lashley has won the title on 2 separate occasions, which is a great achievement for the 45-year-old. Number 6. Shayna Baszler. Before Ronda Rousey made her mark in WWE, Shayna Baszler brought a completely different style to the women's division. Shayna was a former MMA fighter, and her offense has incorporated a lot of MMA style moves. Shayna is truly a groundbreaking wrestler in the sense that before Shayna was wrestling, there was nobody in the women's division that was wrestling with as much physicality as her. When Shayna began to wrestle in NXT, there was concern with how fans would react to her offense. The NXT fans in particular were fans of her in-ring style, and she didn't win the NXT women's title. However, when Shayna jumped to the main roster in 2020, there were complaints that her stiff in-ring style was boring, and this potentially removed plans for Shayna to win a main roster singles title. Number 5. Ronda Rousey. When WWE signed Ronda Rousey in 2018, it was a huge deal. Ronda was one of the biggest names in MMA and pop culture, and her involvement in WWE was monumental for the women's division. Ronda quickly became a full-time talent in WWE, and she would wrestle virtually every WWE superstar in the women's division. Ronda was coming into WWE with an MMA and judo background, and this naturally translated into in-ring work. Whilst Ronda was stiff in the ring, the majority of her offense looked credible and legitimate, and this was seen as something fresh from an in-ring point of view. Now, there were a few complaints from the likes of Alexa Bliss and Nia Jax that Ronda was too stiff in the ring, but these comments weren't supported by others who wrestled a former Raw Women's Champion. Ronda's first run in the WWE was well received, and it actually led to her returning to the company in early 2022 for a second run as a babyface. This consequently offered more depth and substance to the WWE's sparse women's division. Number 4. Sheamus. Now, it's common practice for Sheamus to come out of a match with cuts and bruises all over his body. Sheamus prides himself on working with intensity and physicality. Sheamus likes to view his matches as actual fights. While this can rub some superstars the wrong way, for the most part, WWE superstars have enjoyed working with the Celtic Warrior. Sheamus has had an extremely successful career with his style, having worked with top talents such as Randy Orton, Triple H, John Cena and Daniel Bryan, whilst never holding back to no matter who he's in the ring with. In 2021, Sheamus had a number of intense matches with Riddle, who's also prone to being stiff in the ring. Riddle would publicly declare that he loved his matches with Sheamus, and he loves what Sheamus brings to the table. Number 3. Asuka. 2015 saw the arrival of Asuka to WWE. She was one of the best in-ring talents in Japan, and she was bringing a completely different style to WWE. Her offense was physical and stiff, and it was going to be hard for anyone on the WWE roster to match her intensity. Asuka was an NXT standout, and she had an historic NXT women's title reign which brought credibility to the division as well as the title. When Asuka was called up to the main roster in 2017, she once again found success. Although Asuka kept her in-ring style the same, she was incredibly charismatic, meaning casual WWE fans took to Asuka and made her one of the most popular female stars ever. Number 2. Shinsuke Nakamura. Now, Shinsuke Nakamura's nickname is the King of Strong Style, and for good reason. During Nakamura's days in Japan, he attained a reputation for being stiff in the ring and who made everything he did look absolutely devastating upon execution. This helped Nakamura have some of the most physical matches in Japanese wrestling history, and when Nakamura joined WWE in 2016, the King of Strong Style continued this style against some of the biggest names in WWE history. During his WWE run, Nakamura had wrestled the likes of Cena, Randy Orton, AJ Styles, and Nakamura never held back against these opponents. He's given them everything they can handle. And number 1, Johnny Knoxville. Anyway, just joking. Number 1, Brock Lesnar. And during Brock Lesnar's first WWE run between 2002 to 2004, his in-ring work looked always great and physical, but it was nothing in comparison to how his in-ring work looked when he returned to WWE in 2012. Lesnar has been an absolute animal in UFC, having been one of the most successful fighters to ever step foot in the octagon. Lesnar now incorporated a lot of his MMA offense into his wrestling style with punches, kicks and takedowns and submission moves. Lesnar's matches always looked incredibly real and legitimate, and his matches have in turn become huge attractions on a WWE match card. Although Lesnar's offense is insanely stiff and it looks like it hurts, Lesnar is actually one of the safest guys on the roster, and there have been no complaints from anyone over the past decade about Lesnar being unsafe or reckless in the squared circle. But there you have it, folks, 10 of the stiffest wrestlers currently in WWE. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.